when you fake like that. Head out of the game, I don't play that fact. Once you let me go, no, you never come back. I'ma be the best that you never had. I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Head out of the game, I don't play that fact. Once you let me go, no, you never come back. I'ma be the best that you never had. I'ma kick, 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 I'ma be the best that you never had. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, do you want it? I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, I'm like a rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex.
Alrighty. I was not planning on doing a live today, but unfortunately, I look on Instagram and 14 messages. I'm like, oh my God, someone got traded. What happened? Did we hire a coach? There was a bit of a drop by a media member today that the Raptors have found their guy, and I was like, is that the announcement? Are they going to do it? Look, man, I led the whole Ime Udoka campaign. I feel like I have mud on my face right now, but you got to be honest, the Houston job is very appealing. They've got a boatload of young assets that have a lot of value. I mean, if you want to be real with yourself right now, the combination of cap space, taxes, the potential first overall pick or second overall pick coming in, potentially James Harden, done deal. Jaylen Brown might push his way there. You can really, really start to see where Ime Udoka's head was with the Houston job, and probably also where Nick Nurse's head was potentially with that Houston job. So it's time to set our sights on the next best thing. And I don't think it's much of a concession at all. And in today's video, I want to do an absolute deep dive into what I think is one of the best young coaches in the NBA, and someone who the Raptors should definitely look at, someone that they're very familiar with, in Jama Mahlalela. Man, I'm never going to get his name right. But let us... Okay, hold on. I had it earlier. It's a bit of a tongue twister, right? Mahlalela. It's tough. It's a tough name. But we're gonna learn about Jama. We're gonna hear some clips of him talking, and I'll give you my take on why I think he would be such an ideal fit for a young roster that is desperately seeking some sort of development, that has all the potential in the world. He's known to the Raptors, obviously. For those of you who are familiar with the Raptors coaching staff and their ins and outs, you'll realize that there was a bit of a drop-off in terms of player development when we lost one of our lead player development guys 2 years ago, and that was Jama when he went to the Golden State Warriors. And then last year we lost Patrick Mutombo to the Phoenix Suns. So this is the problem when you're a good organization like the Toronto Raptors. You do suffer what we call brain drain, and the Raptors have suffered a considerable amount of brain drain. So now that the head coaching job for the Toronto Raptors is suddenly open, why not bring someone back? And look, at this point with Ime Udoka out, it's a really strange pool of guys, right? You got Sarunas Jasikevic, who I think is an outside of the box thinking guy, right? From the international coaching circles, interviewed with the Raptors the last time they had an opening. There's obviously Earl Watson and Adrian Griffin, who have been given a ton of, attention as potential replacements for Nick Nurse. Probably a feather in Earl Watson's cap that he seemed to not agree with Nick Nurse, as reports have continuously come out about how the two butt heads throughout. So I'm sure that interview is going to be very telling for Masai Ujiri. And of course, there are guys like Frank Vogel, right? And I think for a team like the Toronto Raptors, new ideas, right? I mean, new ideas. When I was thinking about who I want to be the head coach, one of the biggest things I thought was someone who can connect with these players, someone who understands how to connect with players, someone who has a forward-thinking approach, someone who can adapt to his roster. Because let's be honest, nobody knows what this Raptor team is going to look like next year. There are reports, well, I don't know if the reports are out yet, but they will be out soon, that the Raptors are looking to potentially shop Pascal Siakam. How much does that impact a veteran coach like Kenny Atkinson or Ime Udoka or Frank Vogel from wanting to take this job? They're going to be coaching a bunch of kids, a bunch of prospects, a bunch of draft picks. So you want someone who has an adaptable approach, and I don't think Frank Vogel is that. Kenny Atkinson might still be, someone that they'll look at. But again, this is not about those guys. This is about Jama. So let's get into it. And I promise I'll be a little bit more mindful of some of the comments today. So first, a little bit of a brief history about Jama, just the spark notes of it, in case you have no idea who he is. So, he's a Swazi-Canadian guy. He was born in Swaziland. For those of you who don't know, it's a South African country. It's a country in, in southern Africa, very small country. He spent a great deal of his time growing up in Canada. I believe there's a video which will load up, which talks about, his journey from Africa to Canada. He played for the UBC Thunderbirds, played 5 years, served as a team captain, and helped the team win Canada West title in 2003. And then he graduated in 2004 with a Bachelor of Kinesiology degree from UBC, and Jama was awarded, and the Jama Award was created in his honor. And, he actually, the bio with the Raptors starts at 2013, but really he's been around the Raptors much longer than that. I believe he was around when Brian Colangelo was around. I remember him being around at that time, and he had done various community initiatives. I believe at one point he was stationed in Hong Kong. So there you go. We have that there in his bio there. So moving on from there, obviously, he was with the team. And then in 2018, he was named the head coach for the 905. And yeah, so then, so he's been with the organization through some of their best moments, and he's been largely considered very instrumental in the development of Pascal Siakam, Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet. So he's known to your roster, and he's also known, of course, to guys like Otto Porter, who he, eventually would end up coaching in his first stint as let's say, like a more advanced assistant on Steve Kerr's staff. So yeah, so then in 2021, he goes over to the Golden State Warriors, wins a title, and then when they lose Mike Brown, he's actually promoted up to the front of the bench to assist Steve Kerr. There has been so much positive press about the impact. Just let's take a look at some of the things that the San Francisco area and Bay Area media has said about him. So just to briefly cover the promotion, the tweet says the Warriors are promoting assistant coach Jama to the front of the bench per sources. He fills for Mike Brown vacancy. Kenny Atkinson bumped to lead assistant on Steve Kerr's staff. Mahlalela, yeah, I got it. Mahlalela was hired last summer. He runs the player development program. He's been with the Warriors for less than a year, and this was just an article in the San Francisco Chronicle. Jama has been with the Warriors for less than a year, and his influence already inspired a laudatory epithet, the Jama effect. So Front office staff and coaches coined the term after witnessing something special during draft prospect workouts during the 230 drill, a solo shooting and running exercise that tests prospect skill and conditioning. So everyone was very impressed with him. There has been talks, of course, about Jama potentially being the head coaching replacement for Steve Kerr. Potentially, this could be one of those situations like the Boston Celtics where Steve Kerr would move up in the organization. We already know that Steve Kerr has had his eyes on potentially head office jobs. He used to have a head office job with the Phoenix Suns under Robert Sarver. And, he could be looking to that again with potentially Bob Myers on his way out. So, and potentially Draymond Green and Steph Curry aging up and whatever. So this could be just, maybe Steve Kerr's not interested in coaching a young roster with Moses Moody and, Andrew Wiggins, etc. So the next wave of Warriors basketball could very easily be Jama's, right? So I've seen this happen before, guys. I saw it with Will Hardy in Boston, saw it with Ime, and Ime in San Antonio. These young guys, these young sort of prospective coaches that everyone starts to glow about, like the way that they connect with players. Guys like Darvin Ham, although Darvin Ham is definitely not, in my opinion, on the level of a Will Hardy or a Jama, but it sort of starts to make its rounds around the NBA that this guy is a future head coach. And, Jama was really not getting that type of consideration with the Raptors. But since moving over to the Warriors, he has consistently been, mentioned in coaching circles as next up. So do the Raptors want to wait, 3 years and, watch him, become one of the best young coaches in the NBA, talked about in the same, breath as guys like Will Hardy, or do they want to poach him early? Do they want to do, because they do know him. Let's take a look and let's hear from Jama and, get a window into who he is in case you haven't followed the 905, in case you didn't, listen to his interviews. I think he did a couple of halftime interviews. So I'm sure the face is familiar, but I'm sure you haven't done a deep dive into him. So let's take a look. And this is from the Warriors.
A pedigree of being a former player. I didn't have a pedigree of having a, family member who was in the NBA. I was removed from the NBA. I was not part of the NBA family or NBA fraternity. And I think for me, I kept working, I kept persevering, I kept doing all the little things as much as I possibly could. And so for me, that was this incredible realization that even though I didn't come from NBA roots, that if you did the work and if you persevered and if you fought through the challenges that it does take to get there, that you can get there. I grew up in Swaziland, which is a tiny, tiny country in southern Africa. I was there till I was 5 years old, so I don't, super remember my earliest years, but I traveled a lot in southern Africa. I spent some time in Swaziland and then some time in Mozambique as well. And both of those countries were obviously very different from the rest of my upbringing, which was in Toronto. And I think it gave me a great perspective on sort of understanding the diversity of the world and realizing that things are more the same than they're different. And I do think that this sense of my early experience, and I've always felt like I've had the benefit of both worlds. My upbringing of having a white mother and a black father, and then living in two different places that are distinctly different from each other, was hard. And when you're in Swaziland, are you more Canadian and white than when you're in, Toronto, and are you more black and African, and how do those interplay? 3 drills left, almost there. Good work, good work, good work, good work, good work. Coming to an organization like this, which is so high level and has such great history and has such tradition, you come in with sort of do I just sort of try and be what they want me to be and just try and fit in? Or do you bring your experiences and you bring the things that you know and that you love and you're passionate about? And so I think just making a choice to be me and come here and try and smile as much as I can and encourage people as much as I can and make every day a sunny day as possible. And I think that being a coach now, for me, is this really great time that I get to spend with players and spend with people and put them in the best situation to improve. Growing up and going through high school, I trained to be a teacher. I did it in university. I did an education degree, and I was going to be a history teacher and a phys ed teacher. And I think as I finished my university playing career, this connection in the sense of, well, I love coaching, but I love teaching, and maybe my career might not be on the teaching pathway, but more of the coaching pathway. I was hired and I had this choice to be an educator or to go into basketball, and I made the choice to go into basketball, and it was literally to enter the Toronto Raptors community level. And so that beginning position moved slowly from year to year into more positions of more leadership, more full-time roles. Hey, good job! Blue team down there! Blue team down there! And there have been times in my career along this pathway where you sort of think about, is this worth it or not? Is the fight of figuring out schedules and who's going to go where and who's going to do what, is it worth it? And I'm very lucky to be in a super supportive situation with my family and two wonderful young kids, and they make it all worthwhile. But it's the time that I spend at home that matters more to me than what I do on the court, to be honest. I think one of the main things that I can sort of bring is organization, and I think it's important, right, for staff to be organized so the players feel organization. They know where they are, they know what they're supposed to do, they know what's happening, and envisioning the entire process is an important part, I think. You can get bogged down in the minor details, but having a sense of big picture what's happening for a practice, for a week, for a month, for a season, that's sort of one of the main skills that I bring to our team and one of the main attributes that I have. I think it also becomes about people. I think understanding how our players are feeling, what's going on in their lives, what's happening for them, because that's such an important part of how they're going to play in that game tonight. So really picking up on some of those cues from our players and being able to talk to them about that, and then find the right resources, just, figure out a way to get them right, figure out a way for them to play as best and as hard as they can. My name is Jama Mahlalela. I'm an assistant coach for the Toronto Raptors. I was born in Swaziland. It's a tiny, tiny country in southern Africa. Most people have never heard of it. I was born there. I lived there till I was 5 years old. A really unique story of a Canadian mother and a Swazi father, and living in both worlds. I moved when I was 5 years old to Toronto, and then grew up for the rest of my childhood there. I went to college at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, played 5 years there, and again, it was an interesting career, sort of not being the superstar, not being the main player, but being a real integral part of the team. I think my favorite moment from university was in my last year. We played for our sort of Canada West title, so our sort of championship level in our division, and we ended up winning the game. I mean, in my early years, it was the same dream as many of us, that I want to play in the NBA. That was sort of this vision that I had, and in my early years, it was Vince Carter was playing in Toronto, and that was sort of the beginning of basketball to really bloom in Canada and in Toronto, and watching him and seeing what he could do, and thinking, hey, wow, maybe I could do this at some point, or be part of it. As I started coaching, I started working his summer camps, so I became a person that actually was one of his clinicians and ran the defensive station for him every summer, and getting to know him and understand him as a person and watching actually what he does on a daily basis was this amazing growth opportunity for me. I knew at that point I wasn't going to have to play in the NBA, but I definitely wanted to continue this working with the sport that I love so much and so passionately. So I actually started volunteering for the Toronto Raptors. I literally started mixing Gatorade for their youth programs. It was my start with the team. So the connection I had with Sam Mitchell, sort of taking me in as a son basically, and putting his arm around me and bringing me into the team side, was a really important moment for me. That opened the door to me to the real NBA. So he started that. Then Jay Triano was the head coach of the Raptors at that time. And then now currently it's definitely been Masai Ujiri who sort of brought me back into the fold, which I'm incredibly thankful for. And then Dwayne Casey. Every day for me is learning from him, understanding how he operates, the work he puts into what he does to make a team successful is tremendous. So the more I learn from him each and every day is awesome.
So one of the biggest concerns with the Raptors this year was communication. It has been reported, and I promise you it will be more reported, and more stuff will come out as the weeks carry on. Again, I mentioned it in my Nick Nurse is Fired video that if I know some of this stuff, there's no chance in hell that 100 other people don't know this stuff. And look, talked about it in the toxic workplace environment. Like, toxic workplaces happen when communication does not happen, right? So you can create, a situation where you bring in a guy who is, got the greatest pedigree from international basketball, but maybe, he's not as familiar with the NBA game, not as familiar with NBA players, and with trust so fractured already on this team, how do you go about that? The familiarity of bringing in someone like an Earl Watson or a Jama or a Patrick Mundumbo who has already a somewhat of an established tie to the organization, it will probably create more of a smooth communication to start. The Raptors don't have a great deal of leeway to screw this up. So there has to be some sort of precedence given to safety. Now, um, yeah, so Mel, I caught your comment about like, well, you said it was going to be Ime Udoka, and now you're saying it's this guy. Look, I have zero doubts that the Raptors would have preferred Ime Udoka. I have zero doubts that he was attached to the Raptors. I have zero doubts that they talked to him. So that's all we were talking about. We did not, say, okay, well, if, Detroit offers him an ownership stake that he wouldn't go to Detroit, or if Houston offers him some crazy amount of money. You have to also consider that the Raptors are on the books next year for $8 million for Nick Nurse. So whoever they bring on, maybe they're not going to be able to pay like the most premium dollar. I know it sounds crazy to say that $1 billion organization like MLSE would cheap out on something like coaching, but hey, you chose to fire a guy, you chose to fire a guy with $8 million left on his contract. Maybe we're not going to give you another $8 million to spend on his replacement, and you're going to have to get a little creative. I don't know. But the vetting process of bringing in someone completely new, having to reestablish those relationships. Look, relationships take time. I think most people would understand that turnover is one of the most expensive things for any organization to go through. And this is why most great organizations don't have a great deal of turnover. So for the Raptors, who inevitably had to part ways with their head coach due to, basically being under the gun and having to make a change, potentially because of all of the issues that came up this year, I assure you there was no inkling to start the season that they would be parting ways with Nick Nurse last summer. So this has just sort of sprung up out of nowhere on them. The way this season went, some of the things that came out, some of the things that happened, some of the things that sort of surfaced with him. So at this point, you have to consider this as, a contingency plan. Like you have to consider the element of, we didn't plan to integrate a completely brand new person when we made that Jakob trade, right? We didn't necessarily have that in the cards of this is definitely the way we're going to go, because I'm pretty sure if that was the way you were going to go, you might have went a different way, right? Like you might have went a different way with the roster if you knew that Nick Nurse was on his way out. But of course, things happened and you can't really control that. And now you've made the decision to part ways with Nick Nurse. So how do you therefore smooth the transition to the next coach? I think one of the clearest ways, in my opinion, to do that is to bring in someone who already knows your system, knows and understands your facility, understands some of your players, so that it can actually ease some of the, like for instance, when you consider Jakob Poeltl coming back to the Raptors, his fit with the Raptors was almost immediate. You saw the results in 3 games. Within 3 games, it looked like he'd been here for seasons. Why? Because he already had established chemistry with Nick Nurse, with Fred VanVleet, with Pascal Siakam, with OG Anunoby, and those are some of the guys that he's going to be with. Well, Jama, if Pascal Siakam is intending on being here, if Fred VanVleet is coming back, if OG Anunoby is still going to be here, well, it would really help, I think, to have a guy who comes in who has all those established relationships with those guys, especially if those are very favorable relationships, and I have no doubt that they are. Also makes a lot of sense to have someone come in who Scotty can really communicate with, someone who has that sort of pedigree of knowing how to communicate with younger players. So I just want to quickly touch on just the work that he's done. So this is a very favorable article in by Monty Poole for the NBC, and I'm just going to read this out. Insofar as his staff was behind teenagers Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody getting meaningful minutes, Gary Payton II became an impact player, and Andrew Wiggins reaching his potential, Jama Mahlalela, first season as Warriors director of player development was a rousing success. He played a crucial role in the victorious NBA Finals in year 1, not only stands as a validation, but also sets a lofty standard. Year 2 will be even more consequential, according to Jama, because it will provide a glimpse into what's possible from the likes of James Wiseman, Kuminga, and Moody. They are considered the core of the next phase of the Warriors basketball, the one that does not include Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson. The real work begins this weekend, California Classic, yeah. And look, he was widely considered instrumental in reintegrating or reinvigorating Andrew Wiggins. You cannot deny his role in Jordan Poole's ascension last year. So look, whether you want to say that, okay, well, James Wiseman hasn't really worked out and he got traded, and, Jonathan Kuminga is not really much to write home about. You cannot deny that the Warriors' young players like Dante DiVincenzo and guys like Moses Moody, Jordan Poole, they have had some success, and the Raptors have obviously had some success too. I think it will make the process smoother. I think he's a good candidate. If it's not him, I'm a little out of ideas at this point. And just being honest, I don't think that Earl Watson is necessarily like a great option. Beyond Ime Udoka, like I'm cool with Sarunas, but like, it comes with that adjustment curve. And again, like when you're a front office trying to get to know somebody, like, if the relationship is not really established, you have to go into draft workouts like within 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and you're going to start looking at, you're already there. You're already in the scouting. You have to make decisions on this roster, which means someone comes in, they have to have all those meetings and integrate and figure out what they can do with Pascal Siakam, maybe Pascal Siakam, Gary Trent Jr. And it also might impact, who the coach is chosen. Who is chosen as a head coach may also impact your free agency decisions and how willing certain players are to even come back. Are you going to bring in somebody that Fred VanVleet has a favorable relationship with, or maybe someone that hates Fred VanVleet and he's already had bad relationships with him, or maybe he doesn't know him, doesn't trust him, and suddenly it's almost like you're completely starting from scratch. I think the Jama thing, some people said he's a yes man. He strikes you as a yes man. I think he's just a really good teacher. And, there's an ease of communicating with someone who knows how to teach, right? You can consider him a player development coach, but I don't think he's just a player development coach anymore. I think he's transcended beyond that. He coached the 905, man. Like, he coached the 905 through some of their most successful seasons. And, you can't just say, like, he's not just Phil Handy. And I'm not saying Phil Handy would be a bad option, but you have to look at a head coach not as a totality element. Like, there are no Phil Jacksons available. There's no Greg Popovich's available. Ime Udoka is probably the closest thing to that, in my opinion. Will Hardy, if he had not been poached by Utah, was definitely on the upswing of that as well. So the Raptors can go one of two ways. Either they can make the decision now, in my opinion, choose between, someone who's familiar to them, Earl Watson, Adrian Griffin, or Jama, or Patrick Mutombo. I think of that bunch, I would put Jama number one. That's just my opinion. That's where I stand on it. And just based on, what he does well, I think it really translates to what the Raptors need. Beyond that, you wait. You play the waiting game, and you see maybe somebody becomes available, because the Houston job being taken by Ime Udoka, I don't know if there's another really appealing job in the NBA right now. Can you think of one? Because I can't, right? I don't think Detroit is necessarily an appealing job, depending on, how you feel about Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. I think this is a bit of a sobering reminder also to the Toronto Raptors, especially if they're not willing to pay top dollar for their next their next head coach, that maybe people around the league don't feel that strongly about who you have on your roster. Maybe all of the dysfunction and everything that's coming out right now about Nick Nurse and everything that's coming out about the vibe in the locker room and the pending free agency, people generally have an aversion towards uncertainty. And there's a lot of uncertainty about A, what this team is, B, where they're going, C, what is their philosophy, D, are they going to have cap space ever? There's obviously, the element of taxes. I mean, this would be an employee in Canada, right? So while I do think that the Raptors job is definitely a lot more appealing than it used to be when the likes of Jay Triano and, Butch Carter and Sam Mitchell were gracing our benches, and I do think that there's a shine to this organization that still exists because of the championship run, I certainly believe that, this is going to be a bit of a sobering, reality or a wake-up check that you would lose your top target to something as disastrous as the Houston Rockets because, again, youth. Like, Ime Udoka is not stupid. He's looking at that roster. He's looking at this roster. He's like, man, I have Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün. I have cap space. I have like a potential, top 3 pick coming in. There's also the element of there's no expectations in Houston. If you suck next year, well, they sucked for the last 3 years. It doesn't really matter. And if you land someone in free agency, which you very well could, I'm starting to think, with the existing relationship of Jaylen Brown and Ime Udoka, that might be, a big reason why, that there is some sort of plan in place between Raphael Stone and Ime Udoka. And one of the biggest reasons that they went after him so hard is because of all the rumblings in Boston about Jaylen Brown being unhappy with his role, being treated like an afterthought in Boston. I wonder if this is the cue to Jaylen Brown is going to the Houston Rockets. Maybe James Harden is coming to join him, and who knows? Maybe and look, if you're being completely real, if you're not being a Raptors homer, that is a much more appealing situation with all the youth and cap space and everything that they have and all the picks coming in and whatever. Their cap, sheet is a much more appealing situation than the Toronto Raptors right now. So, it sucks. I think most of us in this community had sort of talked ourselves into it's Ime or bust. But now you have to move forward. You cannot dangle. You cannot wait too long. Maybe after the first round, someone is going to get fired, and maybe you'll kind of already have an inkling of who that might be. But I'm not seeing any upsets happening right now that make me move off of Jama. So that's kind of where I'm at with this one. I think he'd be a fantastic fit. All right. Okay, so let's just check some comments here really quickly before we end this live. I am knee deep or head deep in Pendant's prep, so okay, he's hearing some Surinus, Toronto Raptors. Okay, so FA says Toronto Raptors retained assistant coach Adrian Griffin after parting ways with lead coach Nick Nurse, and he's expected to receive an interview for the vacant position, league sources tell. Yeah, I gotta be honest, man. I'm not sure how I feel about Adrian Griffin. Not a huge fan. So if he is the head coach, I'm sure temporarily, just with how bad things got under Nick Nurse last year, that it will probably be a somewhat of an improvement. But he is not somebody that struck me as, oh, that would be just a fantastic coach. I understand that he's been mentioned for a couple of years now as a leading candidate, but man, I think it would be a mistake personally. Thank you so much. Completely agree. Yeah, sorry, I am probably not. Okay. So we fired our champion coach for another assistant. I mean, man. So the nature of coaching staffs is so complicated because, one guy gets the credit because he's a head coach, right? But you really, really don't know the impact of assistant coaches. You just don't, right? Like we had Dwayne Casey as a lead assistant on the Dallas Mavericks, and he was credited with, establishing their defense, right? Was he the defensive architect, right? Nick Nurse was credited with his offense. Was he the offensive architect? Like there's so many elements of what makes a coaching staff great, but to me, a head coach is completely distinct. For a head coach, really, a successful head coach in the NBA level ultimately just comes down to relationship management, ego management, understanding people, communication, right? There are some inside sources, that have leaked that, the communication this year was really poor between Nick Nurse and his players, Nick Nurse and his staff. It would be a breath of fresh air. If you're being honest, like it would be a breath of fresh air for players to have someone that has kind of a easy style communication, right? Where where you're going to be, you understand how much you're going to play. Earl Watson talked about it once where he, I don't know if we talked about it in the previous video where we discussed Earl Watson, but he said, I would go up to a player and I would say, you have 5 games to show me what you got. And that's where you're going to, and he'll go up to the next player and be like, he's got 5 games. If he messes up, you taking his spot. And while that might seem cruel or blunt, NBA players need that sort of direct communication, and they will respect you a million times more if you do that, right? the best coaches, the ones that are widely acclaimed as the best coaches, have a way of communicating with players. You don't necessarily find out how you manage egos and manage, disgruntled players and playing time, etc., when you're an assistant coach. So with Jama, like really the sample size is his work with 905, right? I think you can also look at his work with Golden State Warriors. So you can say, okay, he's just a player development guy. But I think developing players is a skill set, and it requires consistent communication. Training and developing, teaching, all of these things are communication skills. So having a great communicator who understands basketball at a deep level, and Jama does, he understands the analytics, he understands, the ins and outs of, and if he's as smart as I think he is, if there are gaps in his understanding, he'll probably be able to put together a coaching staff that can fill his gaps. The downside to Jama versus Ime is Ime's connections within the NBA seem to be much greater and much stronger. I think he would have been able probably to put together a much more competent and maybe even like impressive staff of assistants. And, he did that in Boston and it was great. So I think that could be the major downside, is when you have someone who's not necessarily he didn't come through NBA circles necessarily from the ground up. He's more, integrated with Canada basketball. Then it ends up being a little bit more of a difficulty trying to find, but surely he's been around the league for 15 years. So he's definitely made connections, and, I'm sure he'll be able to find somebody. So this would be my pick of the remaining candidates. Beyond him, I'm not seeing someone that I'm super excited about. Who are you guys super excited about? Let me know. Like, if you could, you guys prefer Patrick Mutombo? I'm hearing Jerry Stackhouse a lot. Stack has had his eyes set on that North Carolina job for a while. He's kind of like, personally, not a huge Stackhouse fan either. So that's just where I'm at right now with him. Like, I didn't love the job that he did in college so far. I realized the program is terrible, and he took over like a terrible program, but I didn't love the job he did turning around the program. And, again, like I've heard rumors for a couple of years that he's been after that North Carolina job. Socrates saying Udoka was somehow a clear path to reach a bright future. Jama is risk. You either succeed or fail, but sometimes the biggest risk in life is to not make a risk. I mean, if Doug Smith is pushing Jerry Stackhouse, that would be a really, really, really good reason to believe that Jerry Stackhouse would be a really bad fit. Why do you like Kuminga? I mean, I'm not necessarily against it, but Siakam for Dame. Yeah, why is this resurfacing? I think I read something from Aaron Rose today about Dame Lillard, like, yo, like $63 million. I don't want to be on the hook for $63 million. Frank Vogel is he's a competent option. Like, I mean, I think it would be a lot of the same if Nick Nurse, right? I've never met Frank Vogel. I have no deep insight into his communication style or whatever. I obviously was a huge fan of teams he's coached. I loved, his X's and O's, but yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. Mark Jackson. I'm out on Mark Jackson. I don't want Mark Jackson as a head coach. For a million reasons, but yeah, not a fan. Alrighty. Let us take another quick look at Jama talking about the player development.
His assistant here, second year with the Golden State Warriors, Jama Mahlalela. Hopefully I nailed that one there. Player development coach came over from Toronto. A nice win tonight. You guys have won 7 straight here at Chase Center. 6 of your last 8, and the ball movement has been excellent. 5 of the last 6 games, 30-plus assists. It feels like you guys are getting back to Warriors basketball.
Yeah, it feels like there's some momentum building now. I think that first half we had was probably the best first half we've had all season, just in terms of our rotations, our players playing well. Like, I think Dante gave us really quality minutes. That's important for us to get everything kind of keep the ball rolling. And then Draymond played some sort of unique minutes where he started the second quarter for us, and that really helped everyone to sort of get some familiarity with how we play, and we're really happy with the performance out there.
Jama, there's been so much talk about connecting the starting unit with the bench, and we know this is a different team than last year, of course, trying to integrate young players, inexperienced players. But I feel like, ideally, I think coaches like to have their defense create offense. But it seems that, to me, in the NBA, the ball movement, including 5 players on every possession, creates some energy from offense to defense. Also, better ball movement, better positioning defensive, that everyone knows where the shot's coming from, so your transition defense is in line. Talk about, like Bonte said, the ball movement, the inclusion of 5 players, and how the transition with the second unit, which is most young guys, is meshing with the veteran group.
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the things I learned the most is starting on the Warriors staff, is like that ball truly builds energy as it moves its way around the court. Like as it goes from the first player to the second player, it gets a little more life, and the third, fourth, fifth. By then, it's almost the ball's going to go in no matter what. You can throw up anything at that point because you played the game the right way. And I think that the Warriors really exude that sort of ability to have our offense fuel our defense, like you're saying. Most teams are the reverse. But we really, if we play good offense, we're going to be pretty good getting back in transition, and we get energized, we play for each other. So our key, without question, is the ball always moving.
Jama, I have to ask about the big man. That's my role on this squad. I'm the big man. I'm the resident big man with the All-Star guards and Hall of Fame guards. So what is it? What are you hoping to get from James Wiseman when he goes down to the G League coming back? What kind of experience do you want him to have down there? And talk about the versatility he can bring to this team as well.
Yeah, so I think James, like, if you look at him and project where he's going to be, his offensive prowess is really phenomenal, right? Like, he's got this skill and great hands, good touch around the basket. He can shoot the ball well. He almost played as a guard, right, coming up. So he has this skill set that's tremendous. So I think we project him forward. He can be this great offensive player. The G League stint right now is really about figuring out NBA defense. And that's something for all bigs, yourself included, took a little while to get figured out. And I think for Wise, the biggest thing we're figuring out now is, like, where is he at in the level in pick and roll, right? Is he a step higher or a step lower? The only way to really figure that out for him is to do it time and time again. Absolutely. And that's why the G League stint is so good for him. And he's going to come back much improved on the defensive end, which is where our real focus is.
And I want to ask you about the young fella, the wing, JK. And we all know player development in this league is so big. You had opportunity to be around DeLon. He had to kind of go through the player development. Myself in Miami. How is it working with a young fella like JK with all the tools in the world, but, still trying to figure this game out?
Yeah, listen, right? It's the NBA's changed even from your guys' time. Like they're so much younger now, even coming in, and have so much less experience when they get to the NBA ranks. So in terms of like JK, so few games that he's actually played. So the first part is, how do we get him experience? And you look at that, like even the New Orleans game, which maybe didn't look great, right? But it was 30 plus minutes of good NBA basketball that 2 years from now he can rely on, right? You look at today playing really quality minutes. That first quarter I talked about, 4 really good minutes of basketball that showed a great sort of poise and sense of how to understand spacing. So for me and our entire coaching staff, it's like this great journey to develop our young players and try and win with our vet players. And it's this fun journey that we're in.
So I do want to make a final pitch for why I think this works. So look, I was very frustrated with Mike Brown as a coach like 8 years ago. I didn't think very much of him. I thought he was all right. I thought he was a very average coach. This year, I saw a lot of Steve Kerr and Mike Brown. He learned, and look, coaching trees are philosophical trees. If you're a great coach, likely you're also a great learner. There's no other way to become a great coach. You need to learn people. You need to learn the ins and outs of the game. You need to be constantly learning. Steve Kerr is very learned. Let's put it that way. He learned under Phil Jackson, and then he learned under Greg Popovich. You cannot think of playing for 2 better coaches in league history back to back for your entire career. And that's pretty much Steve's coaching philosophy now, comes from how he watched those 2 coaches. So now, if he is as gracious and as good a teacher as he's, we've been led to believe, then his lead assistants are also part of his coaching tree. Now, we talk about coaching trees all the time in the NBA. We have, someone like Nick Nurse, who's trying to create his own coaching tree, obviously, with Nate, who had a 1-year stint in Indiana. We have Chris Finch. We have Jama, you can consider him part of Nick's coaching tree. But I think, listening to him now, I've listened to, inspirational and very smart coaches talk ball movement, basketball, etc. at depth. And one of the best, 30 minutes of learning about basketball came from listening to Steve Kerr. He has encapsulated so much of what made Popovich's philosophy in San Antonio and what made, Phil Jackson's triangle and Tex Winter's triangle offense in Chicago and Los Angeles work so well. And it comes down to energy, ball movement, etc. So these are some of the talking points that he's getting. So when Vivek Ranadive and, the Sacramento Kings talked about hiring Mike Brown, what did they talk about? They talked about bringing Golden State basketball to Sacramento. And what we saw in Sacramento this year with Kevin Huerter, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, I'm sure all of us would be very happy if the Raptors played like the Sacramento Kings with a little bit more defense this year. Shit, if the Sacramento Kings with their personnel, and look, you can argue all day that we don't have a single De'Aaron Fox level, isolation scorer on this team that can score in the second box and, just really clutch score or whatever. But this team has a lot of talent. A lot of talent. I think it's being slept on. I think Gary Trent, OG Anunoby, Pascal, I think all of these guys are super underrated right now relative to how they were used and performed this year. I think there's a lot of budding talent as well on this roster. You want to have someone who instills A, the right philosophy, and B, can actually help the young guys. I think Jama brings both. Most importantly, he may be able to transition some of what works so well in Golden State and bring it here, especially if the Raptors are able to restructure the roster to make a little bit more sense in terms of the ball movement. One thing that Masai Ujiri talked about in his presser was talking about play style and talking about how the team wanted to play and talking about how if you're going to play this way, you're going to stay with us and, you can come with us. And that element has to come down to, the fact that Masai Ujiri brought up selfishness so many times. Everything coming out right now is, communication. There was no communication. Who solves the two biggest problems that the Raptors have right now, which is communication and selfishness? I think someone from Steve Kerr / Greg Popovich's coaching tree would be ideal. This is why I was pushing so hard for Ime Udoka. He is, of course, a Greg Popovich disciple. He brought a lot of what Popovich preached to Boston. He is not, despite, what people think, he is not a disciple of Brad Stevens. He brought Popovich's system. A lot of what, look, I watch the Celtics, one of my favorite teams. The Celtics played very differently under Ime Udoka than they did under Brad Stevens. So, look, I just think that Jama has picked up a lot, likely, over the last 2 years, learning from Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is an excellent, excellent teacher. Excellent teacher. I genuinely mean this. Like, in 30 minutes of listening to this man, I learned, 18 hours worth of information. And I always have gravitated towards great teachers. So I think that the Raptors, with budding guys like, think about, someone like Christian Koloko, Precious Achua. The sky is literally the limit with these guys, right? Even Delano Banton. You take guys like this and you put them in a nurturing environment where they have clear direction. You put them in an environment where, there's ball movement, accountability, and good teaching. I think that they can thrive. So I hope that the Raptors will give him a solid chance. I know I'm positive they're going to give him a look if they haven't already. Obviously the Warriors are they're 2-2 right now, I believe, against the Sacramento Kings. So, but generally in situations like this, if the Warriors are willing to let the Raptors talk to him, because they have obviously very big plans for him within the organization. Maybe this becomes maybe there's already a something in motion right now for them to promote him to head coach within the next 2 years, and maybe they're not going to be too excited about this, and maybe that's already been communicated to him, so he's off the table because coaching the Golden State Warriors. He's talked previously about how much he loves California weather. So I don't know, but if I was picking, if I just had my pick of the litter, I pick Jama over most of these guys. So that's where I'm at. I don't want to speak repeat myself 5,000 times. I think I already have. I think I've said this 18 times now. So I think it is time to end this live. Thank you so much for watching this, and please hit subscribe on your way out, or hit like. Pick one or the other. If you've already subscribed, hit like. If you haven't subscribed, wait, hold on. If you've already subscribed, hit like. And if you haven't subscribed, then hit subscribe, but also hit like. That would be great. And I'm back to pen dance prep. Richard, thank you so much for the super chat, man. What do you think of the prospect of either Adrian Griffin or Stackhouse? So I addressed this earlier. I'm not a fan of either at all. At all. And I'm going to be completely transparent. Like, I was not a fan of Jerry Stackhouse as a player. Really hated watching him play from Philadelphia to Detroit. Just absolutely one of my most despised players of the 90s, early 2000s. Just did not like him. And so maybe there is some sort of an aversion to him just because of who he was as a player, that I just didn't like. He's tough. I can understand why people think that. He definitely understands basketball, having, been a player in the NBA, and, I'd be happy to be proven wrong. I've never met him. I have no idea. But yeah, like my initial aversion to, and again, like I've watched his teams play in college. I'm not seeing the brilliance. I'm not seeing, the excellent basketball IQ. I'm just, seeing a bit of a grinder and, maybe a tough guy, but maybe someone who can, be a bit of a dictator and control players and maybe even command some authority from players. But that only goes so far. It can burn bridges quickly. It's not necessarily... Mel, oh man, this is so silly. Sorry. I really hope I realize you're probably having a bit of a meltdown that, Ime Udoka was poached by the Houston Rockets, but this is really getting kind of disturbing at this point. Like, the least appealing job in the NBA. It's one of the most appealing jobs in the NBA. If every single coaching vacancy came up tomorrow, the Raptors coaching job would be one of the top 12 to 13 coaching jobs in the NBA. It just so happens that Houston may be able to outbid you based on the factors that I've already named. But it's definitely not the worst job or the least appealing job in the NBA. Yeah, I don't know. I think last I checked, she was coaching women's basketball. Yeah, look, I'm not closed off to Adrian Griffin or Earl Watson, but I wouldn't be super excited about them. Yeah. Thank you, Gwen. I don't understand this question. Ime was never under consideration for Raptors job, notwithstanding Woj's reporting. Woj literally reported that he was. So I'm not really understanding this comment, but sure. How do you know he's going to be available? What do I not know about this? Tyronn Lue is a great coach. He's a fantastic coach. If Tyronn Lue were available, he would move right to the top of my list. Above, above Jama for sure. But I don't know if he's available. Yeah, look, there was a picture of Scotty Barnes, I think 2 days ago, hanging out with Larry Tannenbaum at the Tampa Bay Lightning and Maple Leafs game in Tampa. I know people, some people are split on this. They don't know what Scotty's going to be, whatever. I think the next phase of Toronto basketball is completely, centered on what's good for Scotty. What are we building with Scotty? And, I've heard rumblings over the last couple of days that they could move off of Pascal Siakam, that in order to avoid cap hell, that's the one guy. I've also heard some people loudly speculate that, Siakam was the person that they were sort of talking about when they, alluded to selfishness and contracts and incentives, etc. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but, and Scotty would have a very easy way to verify who Jama is as a coach because he's really tight with Moses Moody. Woj's word is not gospel. Is your word gospel? Truth bearer. I don't know if you're, there was like another person, I think he was truth teller. There's another commenter, truth teller. And the funny thing about truth teller, I don't know if it's your burner account, but truth teller has had like 85 comments on this channel. And I don't think he said one true thing yet. So it's kind of a funny thing, right? So Woj's word is not gospel. I can tell you that Adrian Wojnarowski is one of the most well-connected people in sports, not just basketball. He has so much information. He is used basically to leak information. So if he said that Ime Udoka was in consideration for the Raptors, that information came from the Raptors, Ime's agent, or someone very close. It did not come from the Tom-Toms and the water cooler, okay? Yeah, I mean, some people have really soured on Woj, but it doesn't change his credibility. It just changes. And from what I've gathered from media people that I've talked to, is that Raptors news coming from Shams is more likely than Woj. So that's something that my boy Leo swears by. That Shams is a little bit closer to the Raptors front office than Woj is, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean that Woj is straight up capping, bro. Like, don't like. What happened is the Nets happened. Again, like, look, all you can do, like, for instance, like, let me put it out there this way: when a report is put out by someone like Adrian Wojnarowski or Shams, like these two guys specifically, there are some other guys also in the NBA that don't get as much credit, like Chris Haynes. There's like 6 or 7 guys that you really should, you shouldn't ever assume that they're lying. Like, they're not lying. They're just not lying. So they've heard something very close to the source. This is not Michael Grange, saying Jalen Suggs is the pick, and then the next day he's not. Or Michael Grange saying, Nick Nurse, I'd be very surprised if he leaves, and then the next day he's fired. It's really funny how often his track record is wrong. Or Doug Smith, recycling, borrowed takes from everybody else. These guys are actually connected. So sometimes something like Ime Udoka, that news report will be leaked in order to get a feeler for how the audience reacts to it. They want to get an idea of like, how do fans respond to it, and they'll actually feel it out and just get a taste for is there instant backlash. There was a lot of backlash in Toronto against Ime Udoka potentially being the head coach. So yeah, so it's always for a reason. Whenever you see something in the news, it's always benefiting somebody, hurting somebody. It's not just floating shit into the air, Again, what is wrong with you? I'm just trying to understand. Like, your comments are so out there. Do you understand how jobs work? Like, the Raptors could have interviewed him. The Rockets interviewed him. He's in contention for both jobs. And suddenly, like, they sweeten the offer, or there's something there where you can't compete with that, or, they're willing to offer him 5 years and you're willing to only offer him 3 years, something along those lines. Like, I don't know. But I can definitely tell you, like, if Wojnarowski is saying, if Woj is saying that he's the front runner for the Raptors job, that doesn't mean that the Raptors are the front runners to land him. Do you understand? Does that compute? Like, does that make sense? I didn't say the Raptors were drafting Jalen Suggs. I was on the Scotty train from day one. Don't put that on me. Yeah. Leaks can come from many sources. I feel like I'm being, yes, leaks can come from many sources, but Adrian Wojnarowski is not reporting, what you tell him. He is, like, literally everything that comes from him is coming directly from the word of an agent, a player, a head office executive, or someone who is deeply, deeply involved in the situation. He's not just taking, random rumors. Sorry, what? You already proved you were on the Suggs train with the video? What are you talking about? I had Scotty ranked above Suggs, always. What the hell are you talking about? literally the whole way through, and never, ever, ever even wavered on that for a second. What are you talking about? Yeah, I heard that too, Alfred. Yeah. Okay. You know what? I'm getting really pissed off right now. You provide me proof of that. I'll give you $200 right now. Find it right now. I'm getting really sick of people lying, bro. Like, I'm not trying to snap here, but gaslighting is a really big fucking thing for me right now. I don't appreciate this. You want to check your facts on this? Like, if you're trying to troll, congratulations. But this never happened. It's never happened. Not once, not ever. I do not like people lying. I read a Reddit thread today where someone said, man, I wish I don't like to respond to Reddit shit, right? Like, and some people just say, oh, he's unlikable, he's too full of himself, he doesn't understand. That's all. These are all opinions. But I read a Reddit thread yesterday where someone said that he claimed to be a top model. Never happened. He lives in his mom's basement. Don't have a basement. Mom's dead. He claimed to start a hedge fund. No, I worked at a hedge fund. What was the other ridiculous thing? He said he used to be a scout for the Portland Trailblazers. Literally never happened. I was offered a scouting job, but I couldn't take it because my mom died in 2008. So it's just like lie upon lie upon lie, and now you're coming at this bullshit. Fuck off, man. Yeah, James would know. James is in the Facebook group. I was posting about Scotty like all the time. I have receipts, bro. I have a lot of receipts. So yeah, like. I don't know, man. It's difficult to not respond to people who just straight up lying. Thank you. Appreciate it, man. I'm not sure why you're angry. I'm agreeing with what you said. Okay, what are you talking about? You just said that I had Suggs over Barnes in a stream, which never happened. And now you're trying to tell me why am I getting angry? You're agreeing with me? We are literally not in agreement. I don't know what you're talking about, bro. All right. Yo, honestly, I really do. I've been thinking about this for like a really long time. It's like why like some people don't like Amateur Sports Hour. Some people don't like Raptors Digest. Some people don't like NBHF. Some people don't like Doug Smith. I don't think I've ever personally read like the level of vitriol that comes out towards Prince Harry basketball. It is insane. People either love it or hate it. Who thought Nick Nurse would be fired? What's wrong with you? Literally is one of the biggest open secrets in the NBA since January. I've been talking about it for a month now that he's going to be gone. He was talking about it. Like, who thought Nick Nurse was going to be fired? Apart from one of his lead assistants, and maybe Doug Smith and Michael Grange, nobody was shocked. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Jeez. Okay, so I actually ended up being forwarded this video by Amateur Sports Hour. I don't want to be talking about other content creators, but this is a live. It's gone over an hour already. Let me just address this. So I caught a little bit of what he was talking about. I don't necessarily think it's hate, but obviously he's not been very high on Scotty pretty much the entire way through, right? Go back to what he said about Scotty at the draft. Go back to his reaction to the draft. Go back to the fact that he wanted Jalen Suggs. I've always said that people who wanted Suggs are not going to move off their Scotty shit until Scotty starts averaging like 25 points per game. Like, they're always going to have this idea of like, nah, he's going to be Draymond, Ben Simmons clone, right? So this idea that, his, I like the fact that he said, that taking a higher volume of shots or whatever, I can't. There are a lot of really smart people in not only the league, but also within the Raptors organization that really believe in Scotty. And look, the fact that Doug Smith and some random YouTubers don't like him, it doesn't faze me one bit. I really don't care. Yeah, so I mean, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Being high will do that to you. Got it. Okay. All right. Squash it. Handshake. Move on. All right. Yeah. I think Chicago is a fine landing spot. Yeah, and I think about that too, right? Like he is really young and kudos to him for doing this at such a young age, right? Like I remember some of my comical takes when I was 17, 18, 19, whatever. I mean, I understood basketball, he understands basketball, but obviously I don't want to appeal to years in this, but obviously watching basketball for 25 years is going to change, how you see basketball. So if he's not even been alive for 22 years, it just comes to the territory. But kudos to him. I think he just crossed 14,000 subscribers. He's consistent with his content. It's well produced. Like shit, give the guy his due, right? Um, but yeah, I don't agree. Obviously, I don't agree on the Scotty stuff, and I've never agreed on the Scotty stuff. And we'll just let that be, right? Um, Yikes. Yeah, that would be. Um, so that was the sort of concerning part about the Masai Ujiri presser, where he alluded to the fact that someone would come in and try to convince them of a play style and give them sort of the blueprint of how they want to play. I think there has to be sort of a joint decision, and I'm assuming that there already is some sort of idea, right, on how you want to play basketball next year. And again, if Masai Ujiri is talking about selfishness and communication as a big problem, development as a big problem, well, guess what? Hire a guy who's known for communication, known for development, and known for ball movement. Jama is your guy. I think it just makes so much sense. Like I think it just makes a lot of sense. Anyway, um, thanks for clarifying that. All right, guys, have a good one, and I'll see you on the flip side. Hopefully, the Raptors move quickly on this because they have a lot of eggs to fry this offseason. And the sooner you get this one variable solved, granted, you don't want to rush it. You want to make sure that the right guy is hired. But the sooner you get this variable solved, I think the sooner you can start getting players in the lab. Because look, like Precious Achua, his offseason has started. And right now he's just sitting there twiddling his thumbs, not knowing if he's going to be on the team this next year, not knowing who his coach is going to be. I don't like this uncertainty for a young team. Like I want them to have like I want this to be done sooner than later for sure. Um, no, I didn't, but I will definitely check it out. I'm a big fan of Open Gym. Um, oh, that's dope, man. Look, need I remind you, when Nick Nurse was hired, there were a lot of people who thought he was the last person or one of the last people who was going to get hired. This is a front office that seems to care, at least, in how they've handled things so far in, existing relationships. So I would not be surprised at all if he's the guy. Okay, that's funny. It's between Earl and Jama. Not opposed to Earl. Um, if I had to rank them out, Jama, Earl, Adrian, Stack. So in terms of guys that are familiar, oh wait, Patrick Mutombo. How would you guys rank those? I would go Jama, Earl, Patrick, Mutombo, Adrian Griffin, Stackhouse. Stackhouse is like my last. Yeah. Yes. So Chris, yeah, they did say that, and I was a little bit taken aback by it. I'm gonna have to, like I someone messaged me that earlier today where um Windhorse, right? It was Windhorse. He said the Raptors already know who their coach is. And I think the comment directly was they know who their coach is, they'll leak it another day or something like that. Um, He's a childhood friend. Really? That's interesting. Um, yeah, so like I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse at this point, but yes, that's I've alluded to it for several weeks now where I was like, wait till you see what comes out about Nick Nurse, and I've just been saying that because yes, his dealings with players, coaches, staff were not great. There were how do I put this? Somebody that I talked to said that in the last couple of months, the last couple, 3 months, he felt very unapproachable, extremely guarded, somewhat paranoid, and not really mentally there. Like he just seemed to be staring past you. That he became kind of temperamental, a little bit not communicative. There was somebody who forwarded me a message, I'm going to say 4 weeks ago, about a player who had been demoted in some way, and they did not hear about it from their coach at all. They just simply found out before the game that their role had completely changed. I don't know if this was an allusion to Thaddeus Young or if this was an allusion to Malachi Flynn or Jet Dowden. I don't know. They didn't mention who the player was. And basically that the coach had just never talked to them about it. And like days and days and days and days went by and they just weren't playing, and the coach never communicated to them, an assistant never communicated, nothing was ever said to them. There was confirmed two specific players who really, really struggled with the mental health element this year. Their family and friends were concerned about them, their well-being. Right, this year, there were steps made by their family and friends to check in on them, make sure that they're doing okay, keeping their spirits up, etc. So it was not a good vibe. Okay, it was not a good vibe, and yes, it was directly in relation to sort of their frustrations and their communication with their coach, and just so the heavy energy. Right, I think people have to realize like energy transfers, especially in something as close knit as a team or a locker room or a team dynamic, and the higher up you are in the pecking order or leadership position of a team, like the more of an impact you have in terms of the energy transfer to other people. I think energy transfer is a really big thing, right? Which is why I think, a head coach above all else needs to be very mentally tough and stable, emotionally and mentally available and stable. Like those two things are really important. So if I was hiring somebody who knew a lot about basketball, right? Maybe like knew like a great deal about everything about X's and O's and whatever, and they had the greatest schemes ever, but they didn't know how to communicate with people. They didn't know how to conflict. They didn't know how to solve, conflict resolution was not a strong suit. Communication was not a strong suit. Um, Empathy, compassion, these things were not really high up on their thing, but they just knew basketball. And there was another person who maybe was very loose on the X's and O's, but they were very self-aware. They were great communicators, super accountable, really mentally stable, high EQ, high IQ, good learners, really humble. I would take that person over the X's and O's guy 10 million times out of 10 million, because those are the things that make great coaches. Like you cannot possibly tell me at this point that Nick Nurse understands X's and O's better than, I don't know, Phil Jackson. I don't know. But like at this point, no, that's a bad example. But some like extremely Larry Brown, right? Or Jeff Van Gundy. Like these guys are X's and O's czars, right? They understand the ins and outs and everything about basketball. But how do they communicate with players? How do players relate to and communicate with them is the most important thing for me for a head coach. It's, what made Dwayne Casey, like despite his lack of adjustments, lack of creativity, all that stuff, he just really understood how to empathize and relate to people, right? And you saw that. And honestly, when you have a guy like Dwayne Casey, it allows everyone else to just sort of have a bigger impact as well, because maybe he's not the most innovative, creative guy. I do want to point out that, so I reached out to somebody that would know about Nate Bjorkgren, because I think like a couple of weeks ago I started shitting on Nate Bjorkgren, and I reached out to a podcaster who is very, very close to the Indiana Pacers and she covers the Indiana Pacers at the time, and she was just like, it's total bullshit. It was a hit job. Like, he was great, blah 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 blah. So I was like, okay, let me try to get the other side of this. And so I did speak to somebody who said, his main thing, like what was really, really the big red flag with Nate, was that he just came in and he kind of just didn't know how to relate to the players, and the players didn't know how to relate to him. He was very ego driven. He was extremely close minded. He didn't want anyone to tell him what to do. He was very like confrontational, kind of had like a little man syndrome at times. There were situations in which, he would screw up, but he wouldn't tell anyone he screwed up. So he would lie about it. And then that sort of fractured their trust, and people just didn't trust him and like him, and they didn't want to be around him. And so I started thinking, I'm like, man, that's Nick's best friend. That's literally Nick's best friend. And so, certain things show up when you deal with, like, when you're dealing with a veteran locker room like a Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry. These locker rooms sort of police themselves. So the impact of what you're actually doing in terms of the communication element, like, you cannot tell me that Scotty Barnes, regardless of how smart, mature, good at basketball he is, has the same veteran savvy, conflict resolution skills, emotional regulation skills as a Marc Gasol. You cannot tell me that someone like Gary Trent Jr. is going to be as emotionally receptive to a benching as someone like Serge Ibaka, who's already been in the league 10 years at that point. When you give a guy a veteran team, you see who they are as a coach. When you give a guy a young team, typically you see who they are as people. And I think that, that's sort of the thing with Nick Nurse is, yeah, he thrived when he had a veteran team. But how do you thrive when that situation is taken away from you and you actually have to do a lot of the heavy lifting that your veterans were doing before? Because one of the most underrated and understated things about Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, the culture that they built here is not Nick Nurse's culture. They were the culture drivers. They built the culture, right? They were the ones who created this environment of guys staying 2 hours late after practice because they stayed 2 hours late after practice. That wasn't instilled necessarily by Dwayne Casey or Nick Nurse. That's just who the guys were. And sort of, and then, that sort of passes on to Pascal and Fred and OG. So they're like, okay, this is how we be NBA players. Well, now, your culture drivers are gone. Dwayne Casey's gone. Kyle Lowry's gone. Marc Gasol's gone. DeMar DeRozan's gone. So who replaces those guys? Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Nick Nurse. 3 guys who may not have the greatest communication skills. From what I gather, none of these guys have great communication skills. So that's where you're at right now. In the absence of leaders, your coach must become the leader. And when pushed into a situation where Nick Nurse had to actually lead men, through difficult conversations, difficult games, difficult stretches, where he had to navigate, how their role was going to shift from game to game. Like, even when listening to him last year during the summer, he talked about how sometimes we're going to play Delano, in the first half, and then Malachi in the second half, and it just works. And I'm just like, trust me, it doesn't work. Nobody likes playing like that. People want like some sort of established rhythm, and then they can get into the flow of things. So I think this roster is so much better than the one you saw last year. I think a good coach is going to come in and really unlock it. I think the players will also be motivated, right? Because there's a lot of blame that went around this season on, the bench and the youth and maturity and work ethic and blah, blah, blah. And I think, with the front office sort of, firing the coach, it puts the onus right back on the players. Because now if you hire a new coach and all the same problems exist, well, it's not the coach anymore. Now it's you. So I think this is a good thing for the young roster. I think it's a good thing for the players. I can gather just, from what I've heard that, maybe no one's crying about Nick Nurse being gone, except for Fred. I mean, he was the only person who had anything really remotely, I don't want to say remotely, but anything overwhelmingly positive to say about Nick Nurse in his exit interview. So I think personally, that yeah. To finalize and to close this out, Jama's my guy. Yeah. All right, guys. Take care, and I'm just sorry. I've been trying to end this chat for like an hour now, I feel. But the comments. All right. Take care, guys. Have a good one. Peace.